Alright everyone, as of yesterday evening, the House Intel Committee ended its investigation into Russian collusion because it found no evidence of Russian collusion. Now, this is both significant and insignificant. It's insignificant in two ways. Number one, generally it's seen as partisan, because House Intel is run by the Republicans. Now, that doesn't mean that their findings are wrong. It just means that it looks partisan. To the average person, yeah, a bunch of Republicans exonerated Donald Trump of colluding with Russia or Russia interfering in the election in any measurable, meaningful degree. Yeah, it's like a no-brainer. It's sort of like when the Democrats looked into Hillary Clinton's stuff there and said, oh, there's no evidence that the informant involved with uranium-1 had any actual evidence that Clinton was, aware or involved with any wrongdoing. Well, yeah, a bunch of Democrats found her not guilty of anything. I'm so fucking surprised. The same is true with House Intel, ultimately. While we would like for these things not to be partisan, if Congress is involved, it's going to be partisan. That being said, secondly, it's less significant because it has nothing to do with the Mueller probe. This is a congressional probe that was conducted. However, it's significant in two ways. Number one, had there been any glaring reason to believe that Donald Trump had indeed colluded with Russia, it is likely the House Intel Committee would have continued their probe because it would have been difficult for them to ignore the actual evidence that they had seen, number one. And number two, you've got to remember, not all Republicans even like Donald Trump. There are some never-Trumpers there that would gladly continue a probe, that would stick in his side like a thorn if they thought that there was any evidence. I look at this, secondly, and give it importance because if I assume that there was any credibility to the probe at all that they conducted, and I do, not maybe a huge amount, but there is some credibility there, that increases the likelihood that Mueller finds nothing. The fact that Mueller has more of the true intel investigation going on doesn't mean he's likely to be privy to any additional info. They interviewed a bunch of people, including people within the intel community. And they've found, Congress has, well, there was no collusion. There's no evidence of it. I've said consistently since the Mueller probe began that will be likely no evidence of collusion. That's because I don't believe there was collusion. I've seen progressives, people on the left, actually. Estevell was one of them. He's funny because he constantly talks about how evil Trump is. He's like, oh yeah, this doesn't matter, but yeah, I don't believe that, Trump colluded with the Russians. It's just that this particular thing isn't a revelation because a bunch of Republicans are saying their fellow Republican didn't, collude with a foreign state to interfere within the elections. It's sort of a no-brainer. Generally agreed, actually. But there is some core of significance there. Look at Mueller. The same people that reported that this would actually happen before House Intel sort of broke the news are saying that Mueller appears to be winding his probe down. If that's the case, then what you've got is Mueller managed to catch a very large money laundering ring that's been in operation for some years, and a bunch of people who are Russian nationals who made Facebook posts. That would be the extent of Mueller's probe's results. It's going to be very, very difficult when he's nailing a Flynn and a Manafort and all these people to the wall. You can't call him partisan. You can't call it an incomplete, a not thorough probe when he's been attacked the whole time by Trump fans. So the Democrats are going to, their entire narrative collapses when Mueller comes out and says what I think he probably ends up saying. There's about a 90% chance that he comes out and says, no, we found no evidence of collusion. Other people, were maybe working for Russia. That didn't influence the election, said this with regards to the 13 Russians. The interference didn't affect the results, number one, in any impactful way. Number two, none of that was with Trump's knowledge. Number three, no wrongdoing from his direct inner circle. What you've got is tangential criminal matters involving Manafort, people who worked with Trump, but those matters involved their behavior from a decade before. It didn't involve anything, concurrent with the Trump campaign. So that's what's probably likely. I think House Intel was right to eventually... the Democrats in House Intel were like, oh, we haven't interviewed everyone. At some point, though, you've got to give up the shtick. At some point, you've got to say, we've interviewed X number of people. We've had X amount of time and X amount of budget put into an investigation. We have found no evidence. You can't simply investigate someone in perpetuity for the rest of eternity. At some point, you need to have hit a certain, even a minor threshold of something beyond just a hunch in order to continue a criminal investigation. Why is Congress going to sit there and fucking twiddle its thumbs and waste everybody's time when it could be doing something more meaningful? It doesn't make sense. It's like the Mueller probe. At some point, he has to end the investigation if there is no measurable evidence that Trump himself, did anything wrong. It's not, oh, a bunch of Russians bought Facebook posts. Okay, that's very interesting. You charge people for trolling, I guess, for happening to be Russian nationals. They spoke to somebody in the Kremlin, therefore, treason. Which, by the way, I don't think as a charge is even going to stick. Indicting those 13 Russians. Other than I think the 2 involved in money laundering, the rest of them, they're not going to be able to charge them with anything. There's no crime. You can buy Facebook ads. You can satirize candidates. You can run a bunch of bots on Twitter. It's against their TOS. You get kicked off Twitter, but it's not against the law. There's a difference between the two. There's a private corporation, the government supposedly aren't the same thing. Of course, there's a little bit of overlap these days, unfortunately. No, that means nothing. And as far as Manafort, yes, I'm sure that Trump dug deep into their histories, and he was fully aware that they laundered money 10 years ago, or some say I think it was like 2006 or something that they talked about with regards to Manafort. Flynn, he had inappropriate contact, but it wasn't even with Russia; it was with Turkey. The reason he got investigated in the first place was because of his contact with the Turkish government and trying to lobby for them while being in this position. But again, it had nothing to do with Trump. Trump didn't say, hey, go over to Turkey and tell Erdogan that if I win, that great things will happen in our relationship. So far they haven't. So far, Erdogan has used the last year as an opportunity just to attack Greek people as much as possible. No offense to any Turks watching this, but Erdogan he's not all there. He's going to start a war at some point. It's a big problem. Now, House Intel has ended their investigation because apparently there was absolutely no evidence. Like if I somewhat wrongfully, and don't even have a warrant to begin with, if I'm running an agency or I've got a bunch of other high-powered individuals, we got access to we can call people before us to testify. We got basically a limitless budget. We can do whatever we want. We rub elbows with the intelligence agencies every fucking day. I can talk to Pompeo anytime I want. I could talk to Comey and bring him into the office on the weekend. Nobody bats an eye. It's all totally normal because I'm in House Intel. If I'm in that position and I'm investigating a person for months and months on end, interviewing witness after witness after witness, and I still don't have any evidence that anything was done wrong, why would I continue the shtick? Why would I continue to do that? It's a waste of my time too. And it's going to look bad. I think House Intel also, even for the rhinos on it, they would love to investigate Trump, forever. They probably looked around, they said, eventually the narrative breaks down on its own anyway. Mueller at some point has to wrap his up. If House Intel is still investigating after Mueller's come out and said, there's no wrongdoing, we're going to look like assholes. So we need to wrap this up. Maybe they got forewarning that Mueller's almost done with his probe. There are murmurings that Mueller may be about to end his probe. I'm not sure of that. It could be another year that he goes on, but it would be slightly abnormal. It'd be certainly quite fantastic for his probe to continue much longer. It's been going on for, I think, the better part of a year now. At some time, he's got to give it a rest. Okay, you found other people have done wrong. Trump, meanwhile, who's the main, reason for your investigation existing in the first place, appears to be absolutely unscathed, like he doesn't do anything wrong. Can you imagine if he has to come out and say, no, he's clean as a whistle? Everyone else in D.C. apparently is corrupt. It's really, the swamp is real. Mueller he comes out in a MAGA hat and he's like, I've seen some shit. He could end up having a situation like that, but I just don't believe it. And if Mueller comes out and says, well, there was Russian collusion, but he doesn't mention it involved Trump directly, and he's like, well, I maybe Jared Kushner did it. I would laugh and say, oh, Bannon told you so. That's the other part of it. You got to realize there's a partition between two distinct sets of people that Trump is associated with over time. By the way, Tillerson is out, which is like, who cares? Pompeo is in, it's like, who cares? Is Pompeo, former CIA director, so it's interesting that Trump would choose somebody like that to head the State Department. It could be a forewarning that war is coming. I hope not, because then it probably isn't Trump 2020. A lot of his fans don't have a stomach for war, and you can't A/B test that quite as effectively as you can the gun control issue, which he successfully did, by the way, backed off of that. I'll be covering that later. So House Intel has ended its investigation. Good. You know, you can kick the can for a while. You're going to run out of road eventually. Mueller, eventually he runs out of it too. He's going to look like an asshole if he has to come out and say, well, you know, we spent $100 million in a year's time and interviewed 1,000 people, and here's 10,000 pages summary of the further 200,000 page full documents of what we found. Oh yeah, Trump is just fine. He did nothing wrong. People are going to say, oh, so it was a witch hunt. So Trump was right. And then, trust me, that argument will actually hold weight, even if that's not the intent of Mueller. So, you know, beyond the Democrats, who of course they do want a witch hunt, you know, they want a Benghazi like the Republicans had before, because great for electioneering. But Mueller, let's assume that he's like non-biased. He's just like, I'm fucking doing my job. He's going to look really biased if that ends up happening, if that's the case, if he drags it on too long. It's a waste of people's time. Take a feather out of the hat of the House Intel Committee and end your investigation if you don't have any measurable results. If the best you can do is Manafort laundered money with Tony Podesta 10 years ago, yeah, that's going to be a problem. Also, it's probably going to help Trump drain the swamp a little bit. That's about all. Peace out.